Welcome to the Monday edition of the Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. Joining me via Zoom, Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Luchi Cruz-Valdes, the head of News 5. Ladies, happy Monday. Almost said happy weekend.
Good evening.
Okay, what's our top story for today or for tomorrow, Ami? What's your banner story tomorrow?
Siyempre, state visit. Pero interesting din yung yung ginagawa ng caretaker natin. Si VP Sara, meron siyang security briefing agad-agad at may policy statement
No
siya.
mercy.
Yung no mercy.
Yes, no mercy and hard line toward terrorists and criminals. No, interesting din.
Yeah, that sounds more like a harder line stance than anything that the president has made in the last 2 months.
Yeah, saka priority yung meeting. It's a security meeting. Top level.
So that's interesting coming from the vice president and the education secretary. And interestingly as well, her critics have also pointed out that she's getting what, ₱500 million in confidential funds under the OVP.
Yes, so
nga.
malaki yung
ang laki
That is aside from the 2 billion pesos that she's getting for good governance funds. But then that's for different. That's for a separate episode altogether that we can talk about. Pero I just brought it up kasi we're talking about confidential and possibly intelligence money.
Pag security nga daw yon, sinabi na ng
Peace and order.
study.
Among other things like social benefits, libreng sakay, also peace and order.
Yes.
So yun. And also, maliban dun, of course, you're also looking at the president's visit ngayon sa Indonesia, what they talked about and what they apparently have not talked about.
Did not talk about yung kay Mary Jane.
I.e. Mary Jane Veloz.
Yes. Well, at least apparently, kasi we don't know. We don't know, maliban sa what they've announced publicly, we don't know what else they've talked about or discussed.
DFA lang daw ang nagdi-discuss so we're guessing na hindi umabot sa top level siguro.
Okay. Well, that would probably get more interesting as the days go by. Kasi the only thing that's keeping Mary Jane alive at this point is our commitment to pursue human trafficking case against the recruiters. And she's supposed to give a deposition which she has not yet given since 2015.
Yan ang ating yan ang problema natin.
So that's all pending. Anyway, dami pag-uusapan. And for that, we will be talking to a geopolitical expert in a few minutes. We will just go into a gap first. So do please stay with us. We will be right back. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is now on his first overseas trip as chief executive. How does he plan to strike strong alliances and partnerships with other nations? Let's get the insights of political scientist and columnist Richard Heydarian. Professor Heydarian, magandang gabi and thank you for joining us and welcome back to Chiefs.
Kamusta po? Buenos dias, buenas noches. Pleasure to join you guys.
Good
Yes, sir.
evening.
Yes, sir. Well, of course, we do want to talk about alliances, partnerships, and relationships. But I want to zoom in to a particular issue that probably will have or could have bearing on all of these alliances. In particular, yung kaso ni Mary Jane, di ba? Possibly geopolitical implications,
Right.
of course, political implications, and of course as well, local politics, implications on local politics in Indonesia and in the Philippines. So let me start off with that, sir. I'm wondering lang, what do you think are the major or the main considerations at this point for both Indonesia and the Philippines when they consider the case of Mary Jane and whether or not she could or would be given another stay or commutation? How likely is that when you look at things from the big picture?
Right. So, nung isang araw po, nakita natin na quite nag-trending yung comment from some of the loved ones of Ms. Veloso about previous presidents supposedly not doing enough, no, in terms of her situation. But I think that's extremely unfair to the late President Benigno Aquino, who literally went the extra mile, and also figuratively, right, to convince President Jokowi to stay the execution and ensure that walang miscarriage of justice. No, I think there was even potential violation of protocol for him to do that. And let's not forget, this is a very, very sensitive issue in Indonesia, because Indonesia historically has had a hard line on the drug war issue. Although under the SBY, Susilibang Yudhoyono administration, medyo more liberal, lenient yung application of death penalty. But Jokowi, when he came back to power early on, a la Duterte style, also took a very strong stance on the drug war. And at one point, in fact, he referred to the Philippines crackdown on the drug war situation as some sort of inspiration. Let's not forget that former Philippine police chief and current Senator Bato de la Rosa also got the highest civilian award from the police forces in Indonesia. So this has a very strong domestic dynamic. We have a presidency of President Aquino trying to go the extra mile to help the situation. Under President Duterte, of course, it was an awkward situation. He was the last person you could expect to help in this case. But now let's see with President Marcos, because of course, there's also domestic politics dimension here, right? I mean, you discussed a while ago that our current vice president as a caretaker is once again taking a strong stance, tough stance on national security issues.
Yes.
And let's not forget, that has been some point of contention between the House of Duterte and House of Marcos, right? Because President Marcos' priority in his first 6 months is clearly economics. And there were a lot of supporters of former President Duterte and supporters of Sara Duterte who felt that the issue of LCAC, the issue of federalism, the issue of fighting against domestic insurgency, and the drug war were not as much given priority by the current president. So in short, napaka-sensitive ito, not only on the humanitarian level, but both in terms of domestic politics in the Philippines and also in Indonesia.
But you can see a way out, no, Professor? Kasi it's in our court. The ball right now is still in our court. No? Pinagbigyan tayo ng Indonesia despite, as you mentioned, Widodo's hardline is hardliner on drugs.
Right.
And he cannot appear weak before his constituents also, no? So, pwedeng yun ang sabihin ng Philippine government, no? It's still in our court, saka talagang ganyan yung courts natin, mabagal eh. Di ba?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be very respectful of course, the domestic judicial process in Indonesia.
Yes.
And we have to constantly say, we're not interfering here. As you know, Australia, many other Western countries had similar problems. And the more they criticize Indonesia or try to put pressure on Indonesia, the more it backfired. The thing in the Philippines is that wala tayong colonial history in Indonesia. We are a similar post-colonial country. There's an ASEAN solidarity dimension. At yung angulo po natin dito is this could potentially be a miscarriage of justice because we're talking about someone who unwillingly or unwittingly, right, was embroiled in the situation that has put her here. So we're not questioning the laws of Indonesia. We're just trying to ask for solidarity and understanding and also making sure na walang miscarriage of justice against one of our citizens. So on that level, it's a humanitarian appeal. It is not an interference in the law and order priorities of the Indonesian government. I believe that has to be consistently the stance of the Philippine government, even under President Marcos and also by the DFA. So hindi tayo nakikialam sa politika nila the same way na ayaw natin may makialam sa atin. Pero humihingi po tayo ng konting understanding dito kasi ang problema po natin is potentially baka na-set up yung itong kababayan natin or may miscarriage of justice. So it's more like a due consideration to more properly oversee how this case is being handled by Indonesia without questioning the credibility of their judicial institutions. In fairness naman, I think both President Aquino, President Duterte, and now I'm sure under President Marcos Jr., very sensitive tayo dyan because Indonesians, they really don't like to be told what to do.
Yes.
Absolutely not. It backfired every time Australia, Western countries tried to tell them how to approach this issue.
So do you think this is a diplomatic risk to even bring up this issue in this first state visit of the president?
Yeah, siguro. I mean, I think for President Marcos Jr., he rather approaches this, through the corridors, diplomatic corridors, rather than directly. Kasi in the case of President Duterte, unavoidable yun dahil, di ba, front and center sa kanya yung issue ng drug war. So, biglang medyo awkward yung situation. But Marcos Jr. is in a completely different situation, right? Because in his case, he's inherited this from the former president, so you cannot blame him for the situation right now. And at the same time, he can say, well, they're backdoor negotiations, and let's stick to that. And of course, Marcos Jr. here is to make a statement, right? He wants to build a relationship with Indonesia. I mean, yes, the Ms. Veloso's case is extremely important, resonant yan sa atin. At the same time, there's so much also to Philippine-Indonesia bilateral cooperation. These two countries put together, lampas sa kalahati ng population ng buong ASEAN. Indonesia is the president of G20 this year. Indonesia is going to host in Bali, Biden, Putin, all of these global leaders. Indonesia has $1 trillion economy. Indonesia could be a huge source of investment in our infrastructure. And also, pinag-usapan na kanina ni Ed na we're also looking at buying certain armaments or surveillance aircrafts from them in the past warships. So there's a lot there, no? And one of the things that frustrates me is I think wala pa nga tayong direct flights to Jakarta. Every time I go to Jakarta, I have to pass through Singapore, etc., which doesn't make sense for the two biggest countries members of ASEAN. As far as I know, baka nag-change yan sa pandemic. But until 2019, that was a situation that was awkward. And lastly, yung bilateral trade natin is just under 10 billion, and much of it is really Indonesia exporting to us. So halos wala tayong in-export sa Indonesia. I'm sure we can find something there. Kaya nga andun yung technocratic team. And lastly, by the way, we also have big maritime borders with Indonesia. We did some delimitation in Celebes Sea sa baba. And I think on West Philippine Sea, on a lot of maritime security counterterrorism issue, we can also cooperate with Indonesia. Indonesia is a big country in the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Baka pwede rin sila tumulong dyan sa Mindanao. So in short, what I'm trying to say here is that, yes, importante itong humanitarian case we're talking about. At the same time, we also have to look at other dimensions of our bilateral relations, which have been completely undertapped and has been a big source of frustration for ASEANists such as myself over the past decade.
Pero sir, it could work both ways, I suppose. In handling the Mary Jane Veloso case, we could either strengthen our relationship with Indonesia in pushing for her release, or we could also weaken, depending on how we handle the case.
Right. But Ed, I mean, I think that depends on the character of the president. I think if it's a much more risk-taker president, much more assertive president, I think he or she would have done that. But let's be honest, as far as Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is concerned, he's a much more cautious person, right? We can see that. I mean, look at his inauguration speech he saw. He didn't talk about any controversial issues, right? Including issues dear to the Dutertes, right? So that's why we also have this domestic dimension of some in the Philippines wanted harder line. So I think it's also a reflection of the character of President Marcos Jr., who doesn't want to rock the boat too much. He wants a steady sail towards consolidation of regional alliances and partnership. And also he wants to show that he is a true statesman. That, the Marcoses have a reputation for better or for worse. So he's also here to make sure that this is also about projecting an image of statesmanship and responsibility. Kaya siguro, I completely agree with you, Edna. This is a good opportunity to say, oh, eto na, I mean, this is for solidarity, etc. Maybe you can help us. But I just don't feel this is the personality of Marcos Jr. or his priority for that matter at this point in his presidency.
Well, Malacanang is putting emphasis on the defense cooperation agreement signed, apart from the creative industries and economic, of course. Pero what do you think? What can we achieve together with Indonesia? Of course, we're talking about similar threats, not just not just geopolitical, but climate change, that kind of cooperation, which also entails national defense.
Right.
So how can we push that cooperation further?
Yeah, I think first of all, we always talk about ASEAN multilateralism. What will the 10 ASEAN countries agree on in terms of West Philippine Sea, in terms of Myanmar, etc. But the big thing nowadays is ASEAN minilateralism, meaning cooperation among few key countries in ASEAN on special issues and real cooperation. Hindi lang yung mga, mahinang statements, etc. So I think that's where Indonesia is important to us as a de facto leader of ASEAN. Kasi pagdating sa counterterrorism, pagdating sa West Philippine Sea, pagdating sa China, maraming mga issues dyan. I think we can have mini-lateral cooperation with Indonesia in parallel to the ASEAN processes. Kasi tanggapin natin, limitado talaga makuha natin sa 10 ASEAN kung ang basis is really unanimity, not even consensus. Malamang hindi mo makuha lahat ng bansa to say yes on an issue where we want to get yes. But I think with Indonesia, if we cooperate under the aegis of ASEAN, bilateral, minilateral, we can get a lot of cooperation. By the way, for instance, meron na tayong trilateral intelligence sharing, counterterrorism, maritime patrols with both Malaysia and Indonesia in light of what happened in Marawi. And I think Indonesia could also be very helpful in terms of long-term stabilization of Mindanao as we move towards the Bangsamoro creation. Remember, big leader, Indonesia is the biggest Muslim majority country on earth. It's the third largest democracy. And eto nga eh, actually in the past few years, under Retno Marsudi, their foreign minister, from Palestine to Afghanistan, and then earlier under Netaragawa in Cambodia and Thailand border disputes, Indonesia has been an interlocutor and mediator, right? So why can't they help us here also in the case of Mindanao, or help us with China on the West Philippine Sea front? Kaya nga sabi ko, very undertapped, underappreciated itong relationship natin with Indonesia. And I believe it's vice versa. It can go both ways. And maybe, just to add on this thing, as you may know, Indonesia also has giant fintech companies like Gojek, right? Now, I don't know if, I'm sure some companies will not be happy domestically for me saying that, but maybe Gojek can also get into the Philippines and provide us affordable, efficient kind of services that we can get from fintech companies. Because the Gojek of Indonesia is like their Alibaba. It provides all sorts of services, right? You can get a nail polish, you can get groceries, you can get ride, etc. Quite similar to some of the apps we have. So maybe Indonesia, which we don't appreciate as much, can also be a big player in the emerging digital economy in the Philippines. And I want to see also updates on that front.
What about the Filipinos in Indonesia? Richard, I remember that there was a time when Filipinos were like the quiet industrial partners. The Filipinos there in Indonesia. In fact, they used to be called the secret of Indonesia's success.
Right.
But that was like 20 some years ago. I'm wondering whether the Filipino community there is still as influential and, whether the government still views them as some kind of asset within the community.
Right. I believe whenever there's a country picking up momentum sa ASEAN, Filipinos are involved there, right? So it was Indonesia 20 years ago. More recently, it's Cambodia and Vietnam. So if you go to those Indo-China countries, ang dami mga Pinoy doon sa international school, advising with bureaucracy. Kaya nga, parang they're always surprised, like, bakit ang gulo ng Pilipinas? Ang gagaling ng mga tao nyo, sila pa nag-advise sa atin how to move forward, right? So you're absolutely right. That has been the case all across the region. You can say 50 years ago, even Singapore and Malaysia would have benefited from the Philippines human capital. So the human capital is really there. But the other thing, Luchi, perhaps we can also talk about is we have also major conglomerates in the Philippines who are increasingly internationalizing, right? These are conglomerates who are running out of market. I mean, there's just so much you can squeeze out of 100 million people with a per capita income of barely $3,000. So Indonesia with 270 million people, right? Or 280 million people and per capita of even higher than the Philippines can also provide new market opportunities. Kasi napaka-similar ang Indonesia sa atin. Mga rule of law concerns. Yes. They're the only other democracy, although of course not a perfect democracy like us. So yung rule of law situation, regulatory environment in Indonesia is very similar to the Philippines. Just imagine a Philippines giant version, right? That's Indonesia. So I think for a lot of our companies who want to expand to new markets, Indonesia is a perfect one for them. We know it usually goes the other way. Indonesians are involved here in some of the projects in the Philippines, but it can go both ways because we have world-class conglomerates also in the Philippines. I think a lot of our companies are involved in Indochina, in Vietnam. I heard some Philippine companies are involved there. But Indonesia is the big prize. It's a G20 country, $1 trillion GDP, and 100 million strong consumer market. So yung middle class nila is 3 times bigger than the Philippines. So if you're a Filipino businessman, you're looking at essentially Philippines times 3, right? So there's so much you can also explore there. And as you said, Luchi, one thing that makes us special is we're kind of like the Americans in the region, right? Our salesmanship, our cosmopolitanism. So maybe how we market our goods will be important. And lastly, on the media front, whenever I'm in Indonesia and I say I work in the Philippine media or I'm a newspaper, columnist in the Philippines, they have so much respect for our media industry, right? And they have so much respect for how we have been at the forefront of cultural diplomacy and all sorts of, cosmopolitan business sectors we have in the Philippines. At not to mention mga movies natin, Yung mga maalala mo kayo or something.
yeah.
I would hear it like back in the day. when I was
Yes,
in
that's
Indonesia.
right.
They will name us yung mga artista na. Now maybe it's more K-pop. Ngayon purong K-pop na lang. Pero maybe if we want the revival of Philippine pop, Indonesia could be a big market. I mean, they love Charis Pempenko. I remember very well they kept on talking about some of our great singers, etc. Right? Oh, she changed her name. Like, okay. Anyway, moving forward.
May P-pop pala sa kanila, no?
Sorry, it's jet lag siguro on my part. I will. Yeah.
Let's go back to the Defense Corporation now, because some people are saying we should be inspired by Widodo's response to
Right.
China's activities in areas claimed by Indonesia. What do you think of that?
Right, the North Natuna situation 2
Yes.
years ago. So we have Chinese Coast Guard fishermen increasingly intruding. In fact, even before Jokowi's response, they had the former maritime fisheries minister who had the policy of blowing up the boats. So kung may confiscate sila na illegal, including from China and Vietnam, she just blows up the boat, right? The Dragon
And they
Lady,
videotape it and release it very, very public.
Yes. So Indonesia has been toughening up, and I think they were able to control up to $10 billion in illegal fishing over those years. No, I mean we're talking about huge amount of money. No, so very similar in problem nila. But in the North Natuna Sea, so this is the area parang West Philippine Sea nila. I mean there's no such thing as North Natuna Sea in official, but this is the waters off the coast of Natuna Islands, which is very energy rich, fisheries rich. The thing is, because yung 9-dash line ng China ay napaka-vague, the Chinese are saying na medyo papasok na rin yung 9-dash line namin dyan. In fact, they use the term traditional fishing rights for China. So naiinis na yung Indonesia dyan since 2012, 2013. And by 2020, Jokowi had to come in, the hammer came down. He visited the Natuna Islands and said, we will never compromise on that. But hindi lang siya nagsalita. The other thing that he did is, now Indonesia is in the midst of $120 billion modernization of its armed forces, with a lot of focus on getting fighter jets.
Wow.
They're canceling projects with Russia because of sanctions, because of concerns over what happened in Ukraine. They're getting F-15 fighters from the US. They're getting Rafale fighters from France. They're building up their warships. They're building their own warships, also capabilities. And Indonesia is the biggest archipelagic country. So a lot of problems we complain about, they have a bigger version of that, right? They're like a giant Philippines. So strategically, we can learn a lot from them. And we can also get a lot of inspiration from them, including in terms of a tough stance sa illegal fishing. Para sa akin, it's really a big blind spot sa ating strategic conversations na hindi natin masyadong pinag-usapan ang Indonesia. We always talk about US, Australia, Japan, even, I don't know, Finland, whatever. But Indonesia is just next to us, and there's just so much we can learn from them. And interestingly, every time I'm in Indonesia, they know more about us than we know about them. They know about our food, they know what's happening in Mindanao, but we don't show that interest. So maybe may let's just say, strategic snobbery ang mga Pilipino. I think we never pay as much attention to our neighbors, unless it's Singapore na mayaman or Malaysia, right? Let's just be honest about that. So ako, because I've been involved in ASEAN, because I've been traveling a lot across the region, I was forced to really learn a lot. And I regret why I didn't learn this earlier. So na-frustrate talaga ako na when talk about Indonesia or other countries, napaka-narrow yung level of discussion. When we're talking about huge countries, largest Muslim majority, third largest democracy, G20 economy, 100 million middle class. So the opportunities are immense for the Philippines, business community, civil society, and the government.
Yes, so sir, while we're talking about China, let me bring this in. Si Secretary Manalo earlier said that we already have initial and general discussions on the possibility of joint oil and gas exploration in the West Philippine Sea with China. I'm wondering how we should look at that statement in light of yung termination ng talks ng Duterte administration in June. Hindi umusad.
Right.
So they had to terminate, and now we're going to, I suppose, another round under a different administration. How should we view this, and what should we be looking out for?
Right. I think there was a caveat or clarification that so long as it doesn't undermine our sovereign rights. No? So I think we have to be fair to the Marcos Jr. administration on this front, which is very different from President Duterte. Remember, President Duterte used the term even co-ownership, right? Co-ownership, okay na yan. And of course, that's a very problematic way of understanding what's going on here, because I mean, our Constitution, the arbitration award in 2016 made it absolutely clear China's 9-1 has no basis in international law, and the claims they're making well into Philippine waters, including sa Reed Bank or what we call Recto Bank, ay walang basihan sa international law. So, if we do joint development with them, kasi iba yun eh. Iba yung joint exploration kung saan they recognize it's our sovereignty. Iba po yung joint development. Pag sinabi mo joint development, it has a clear connotation in international law. That means we both accept no one has absolute sovereignty, so we share resources. A JDA will clearly violate both our constitution and our arbitration award. I don't know which administration is willing to pull that off or which secretary is willing to put his signature to that. And guess what? That's why nothing happened under even Duterte administration. And Duterte was all in for China, but no one in DFA wanted to sign anything, right? That would potentially violate our constitution and put them into trouble or definitely violate yung arbitration award natin. So, mukhang, I'll be honest about it.
But why are we even waiting on that? Why are we even waiting on China for this? I mean, can't we do the exploration on our own or with other partners so that we won't have to violate the Constitution and give them, more headspace into the implementation of a tribunal decision that's already final and panig sa atin, di ba? Why are we even considering talking to them about it? Why?
Great point, Luchi. It's because our exploration activities were harassed by China, right? Otherwise, baka 10 years ago pa lang, medyo nagsimula na tayo. In fact, literally 2011 pa lang, we're making efforts, to explore resources in Reed Bank area, pero inaras tayo ng China. So, what's happening here is parang shotgun marriage tayo ng China. Like, hindi kami papayag mag-explore kayo dyan unless it's also with us, right? At the same time, Luchi, there is a time bomb element. Paubos na yung Malampaya, di ba? Ilan years na lang. So, mag-usap tayo. Don't do anything on the ground. So, siguro kung magaling ang administration nito, again, I'm not gonna pass judgment still early on. Maybe they can try to talk to China so that they don't harass our exploration and then maybe explore joint exploration somewhere else na less controversial. Maybe they can do that. Will China agree to that?
Yeah,
I
why
don't
would
think
they do
so.
that?
But maybe that's what they're trying to do because otherwise, Luchi, it doesn't make sense for us to talk to them if it's preventing us from developing our own resources. As President Aquino put it, and a lot of people put it, what China is doing is this: what's mine is mine, what's yours we share. Right? At the same time, naubos yung Malampaya. It's an impossible situation, Luchi. We have to make a decisive move on this front. Otherwise, sayang lahat ng resources and we're gonna compromise our energy security. Atin yun eh. Yung mga resources dyan, this is absolutely clear by our constitution and international law. So I think the Marcos Jr. administration has to make it clear there's an element of energy security for us that we cannot compromise here. We have to get the ball moving.
Okay. Professor Richard Heydarian, always a pleasure to have you. Very, very spirited discussion. I think we...
I know, medyo, I thought pababa na tayo. When Luchi went like that, I had to go in, all in. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure to have you, sir. We hope to have you again very soon.
Salamat,
Thank you.
Salamat, Luchi, and salamat, Ed. God
Ingat,
bless.
sir.
Talk to you guys.
Thank you.
We are starting up another conversation right after this break, so please stay with us. Welcome back to the Chiefs here in One News. By now, you must have received spam messages on your phone and computers wondering how the senders got a hold of your phone number or your email. Our next guest has an idea. He is Ed Cabarios, National Telecommunications Commission Consultant. Sir, magandang gabi and welcome to the Chiefs.
Magandang gabi, Sir Ed, at magandang gabi po, Ma'am Luchi and Ma'am Ami.
Yes, sir.
Magandang gabi po sa lahat.
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us tonight. Sir, una-una, napakasimpleng tanong. Kailan po kayo nag-retire sa NTC? Akala ko commissioner pa rin kayo.
Nitong June
okay.
30, yes, apo.
So now you are a consultant with the NTC?
That's correct, apo.
Okay. Sige, sir. Let's start off now with, I suppose, the issue on top of everybody's minds, yung mga text scams, all these text messages that we've been getting with our names on them, with my, hindi lang ako, pati Mr. and Mrs. Ed Lingao. Talagang very, very specific na. We never had that before. And everybody's wondering, how did it come to this? Who is doing this and what's being done by the NTC about this?
First, so kasi, scams kasi, matagal na yan. Nagsimula po yan doon sa doon sa mga nanalo ka dito, nanalo ka doon, etc. And they started with yung bang numbers, pwede sabihin natin randomly done. So yun po ang
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yun naman kasi, sir, yun, madali namang ipaliwanag yun kasi anonymous kumbaga yun hindi siya specific sa isang target I suppose
yes.
Yung medyo kaibahan ngayon yung pangalan mo na mismo yung nandun sa text hindi lang kami pati mga senador.
Yes.
Yung mga senador na nakakuha ng mga text na yan.
Personal na
Kasi the advisories, mga advisories po kasi noon is that pagka wala sa phone directory mo, chances are scam po yan. Pagka hindi mo kilala yung nagpadala, chances are scam po yan. So, huwag kumagat sa mga panluloko na ganyan. So, yun po advisories. Kaya naging effective po yan doon nung panahon na mga nanalo ka na nabawasan ho yun kasi nawala na.
Yes.
Kasi po, for as long as they earn, may kinikita po sila, tuloy na tuloy yan. And kung ang chances na mahuli sila ay napakababa, talagang dadami ho yan. At hanggat meron silang maloloko, they will continue doing it. Kaya nga ngayon, nag-level
Pero
up
ano bang MO nila?
Yes, opo.
Pero, sir, okay, para lang maintindihan din ng ordinaryong nakakatanggap ng mga text messages na yan, no? Ano po ba modus? Bakit sila magpapadala ng ganon? At pag sumagot ka, anong kasi yun ang gusto nila mangyari, di ba? Na sasagot ka. So, kiniklickbait ka nila, tapos sagot ka. So, paano sila kumikita doon? Siguro kailangan mong maipaliwanag.
Yes. Po kasi is kung nanalo ka, manghihingi yan ng pera para sasabihin, ipapadala sa'yo, kailangan ganito, kailangan papadala ka. Hindi na darating nanalunan mo, nasa kanila yung pera mo. So, ito po, ngayon, noong pandemic, trabaho naman. Kasi mga tao, they want job, etc. Gusto kumita. So, trabaho naman ang ino-offer, itong kikitain, etc. So, kung kumagat ka doon, hihingan ka ng ganito, hihingan ka ng gano'n. So, doon ho sila kumikita Now, yung iba naman, nag-high-tech na talaga, is yung link na pinapa-click ka sa link. So pag nag-click ka sa link na yon, yung device mo nakakonekta na sa kanila. So anything can happen.
Yeah. Yes.
So well, papasok na po yung identity theft diyan at makukuha yung mga personal information mo. So very dangerous po yun. Yes, very, very dangerous po yun. Opo.
Mr. Cabarios, nag-heighten yung concern ngayon dahil ngayon nabanggit na nga namin na nagkakapersonalan. Pati yung mga names, yun na nga sabi nga ni Ed, pati sila, Mr. and Miss daw. Ang inaalala ngayon ng tao, saan ang gagaling yung data ngayon? Kasi may suspicion sila, yun daw contact tracing siguro, data na mine, o kaya dyan daw sa mga e-wallets. Saan kaya yung posibleng pinanggalingan nun? Paano nilang malalaman? How can they connect the name to the yung cellphone owner to the cellphone number? Saan nakukuha yun?
Well, lahat po ng mga data processors, kasi may mga kumpanya, individuals, na humihingi ng information na yan. Halimbawa, bangko. So, ilalagay mo yung cellphone number mo, yung pangalan mo, etc. So, ito yung mga tinatawag nilang data processors. No? So, ipinagkatiwala mo yung information mo sa kanila, dapat pangalagaan nila. Yung tracing apps, ganun din no? So, lahat to, basta binigay mo yung personal information mo sa kumpanya o sa isang tao, dapat pangalagaan nila yon kasi sa personal information. Ngayon, mukhang nag-leak. Mukhang nag-leak. So, that's the reason why ito pong ating National Privacy Commission, which has primary jurisdiction over the matter, is conducting investigation po dito So they're looking into saan ba nagkaroon ng breach at sino ang sinong data processor ang may kasalanan. So ito po I think ongoing investigation po being conducted by the National Privacy Commission. No? So ang ano kasi dyan is because kung ang tsansa na mahulit, maparusahan sila ay mababa, tuloy-tuloy po yan hanggat mayroon silang maloloko. Tuloy-tuloy yan So, kaya dapat may masampulan. May masampulan para matakot yung gagawa niyan. At isa po siguro, kasi itong mga to, pinapadala sa text messages And these are prepaid SIMs na walang trace. So again, kung yan ang ginamit nila, the chances na mahuli sila is napakababa. So tuloy-tuloy lang ang ginagawa nila hanggat kumikita, tuloy sila. Opo.
Pero sa tingin niyo may capability tayo na matrace yung kung saan yung data breach or data leak? Kaya natin yung i-trace?
Meron pong mga kaparaan at yung ating mga law enforcement agencies kasi yun po ang training nila
Excuse me.
Doon ang training nila, mag-trace dito, mag-trace doon. So sooner or later siguro baka meron silang mahuli na yung data breach na sinasabi. Kasi delikado po di sa personal information Tapos lumabas, delikado. Delikado po yan.
Okay.
So, sir, sa tingin nyo, this justifies itong SIM registration na bill na pinupush ngayon. Makakatulong ba yun?
Makakatulong po ng malaki yung SIM card registration kasi identified ka At kung ikaw nag-register at hindi ka gumamit ng totoong ID mo, may trace pa rin kasi may bumili. So naglista siya, saan siya, etc. So yung ating law enforcement agencies, merong pagsisimulan ng investigasyon. Ngayon kasi totally blank Wala kasi wala ni trace.
Sir,
sari-sari
yes, sir.
binili, walang trace.
Well, sir, tama naman yun, sir. In terms of national security, mas may security nga naman pag register yung SIM cards. On the other hand, ano naman chances na yung registry ng SIM card numbers ma-leak? Kaya nangyari dito.
Under the bill yung under the bill.
Talaga na to breach of trust na Wala.
Yun ang bill
Wala ka naman pagkatiwalaan no?
Specifico na ang may responsibilidad yan are the telcos. specific. So kung may nag-leak, sila ang hahabulin. So klarong-klaro po yan. So pagka iba ho yung situation, pagka nanggaling naman yung information na yan sa mga bangko, sa ibang mga agencies or companies na kumukuha ng information na ganyan. So, yung tracing apps, etc. Iba na ho yan. Pag gagaling
Yes, sir.
dyan, then hindi sa telco.
Yes, sir.
So, ang una, pagka nakarehistro kasi yan, ang una mong titingnan ngayon sa investigasyon is telco, kaya nyo ba galing, etc. Kung hindi, then you move forward. Saan galing yung breach na yan?
Mr. Cabarios, ng 18th Congress, pinasa na yung SIM card eh. Pero binito nga ni President Duterte, no? At saka hindi naman malinaw kung bakit. Pero ang sabi ng mga ibang lawmakers, nagsisisihan kasi daw sinama pa yung i-register pati email address. Anong tingin niyo doon? Should we also register email addresses? Kasi ngayon, ipinasa na naman ng isang committee ng House yung SIM card. So mukhang matutuloy na naman yung measure na yan.
Yes, pero ang suggestion po kasi ihiwalay yung dalawa. So magkakaroon ng ibang separate bill yung sa social media at separate bill ho dito sa SIM card. So the chances na mapasa ho yung SIM card is higher. Yung isa medyo baka it will take time for the social media, but itong SIM card, I think the chances of being passed into law is mataas po.
Sir, I do get the logic of registering SIM cards and cell phone numbers. Pero and I suppose a lot of people also wonder about the logic of having to register social media and possibly even email accounts, and whether government really has to go that far dun sa registration ng social media.
Well, yes, mahirap po talaga yung sa social media. Medyo masalimuot po yung usapin sa social media, registration of accounts sa social media. So, I think that will take time if it is discussed because of so many issues that surround itong social media registration of the accounts. But SIM card, mukhang mas madali po yun.
Okay.
Well, in the meantime, anong pwedeng gawin namin? Kami, mga cellphone, meron kami mga account. Anong pwede namin gawin pag nakatanggap ng mga ganyan? Kasi karamihan nabibuisit, gusto mag-report. Paano ka magre-report kung gusto mo magreklamo? Halimbawa, of course, we can just erase the message. Huwag kang mag-open ng link, di ba? Pero kung gusto mo magreklamo, makakareklamo ka ba? Mahahabol ba yun?
Yes. Late last year po, nag-usap-usap yung mga agencies of government under the ICT and DTI, etc. Yung CICC, Cybercrime Investigation Coordinating Center, National Privacy Commission naroon during that meeting, etc. So, nag-agree ho na merong isang agency, central agency na lahat ng reklamo, lahat ng information tungkol dyan sa mga scam ay doon po sa CICC. So we are coordinating with CICC. So lahat ng nare-receive is forward sa kanila. Sila po ang nag-iimbestiga because as I've said, law enforcement agencies have the expertise to do that. So sila po with of course National Privacy Commission is also investigating the matter. Police, I think, also, and the NBI.
So, pwede namin i-forward doon? May number sila na pwede namin i-forward?
Meron silang sa website nila, meron nung doon. But hindi ko kabisado kasi yung... yes, meron nung sila.
Pero sir, malamang...
discussions noon, meron sila.
Malamang sir, prepaid number yun eh. Malamang prepaid number din yun. So blanco rin ang pupuntahan mo eh.
Hindi, kasi yun ang agreement So lahat doon para kung may gusto ng mga information, naroon lahat sa PICC.
At
Pero yung
maiimbestigahan.
SIM registration, sir, di ba, ang dali-dali naman bumili ng SIM. So every time you buy a SIM, i-register, tapos, isn't there a limit to the number of SIMs that you can actually buy? Because I know people who buy SIM cards in bulk, no? For whatever reason, they're trying to avoid
Avoid
alam mo yun, being followed, may tinataguan ng mga tao. Nako, ang daming kilalang ganyan. So they have like 3 or 4 or 5. Mga ganyan, sir. So lahat yon i-register. Ganon ba yan? I mean, di ba
Yes,
masyado
lahat po i-register.
ang proseso? Okay. And dapat tama yung identification, di ba? Dapat, you're not just putting any name there or whatever. Parang bangko ba yan na
Yes.
magpe-present ka ng mga ID mo na may pirma. So you're gonna make it harder actually for honest prepaid SIM buyers, no, to actually register. Parang kumbaga,
Yes.
ang mas mahirap yung proseso. Dahil ngayon, kahit sari-sari sa makakabili kayo ng SIM card, di ba?
Yes po. But pagka sinimulan na po yung registration, hindi na po sila po pwede. So, a little inconvenience, but it will help a lot naman to deter these scams and other criminal activities.
Iimbestigahan na daw ng Senate siya ng mga ganyan eh. By way of legislation, ano yung inaasahan ninyo sanang mapasa apart from the registration of SIM cards?
Well, yun po yun. And meron pong, I think there is a bill amending yung Data Privacy Act, which is giving more power at the National Privacy Commission. That will also help, no? Kasi dumadami ho yan eh. And private data is very important to us, no? Na dapat hindi maibigay maski kanino man. So giving National Privacy Commission more power to prosecute, mas mabuti po siguro.
Okay. Sir, medyo lilihis naman ako ng topic ng kaunti. I understand you retired from the NTC as a commissioner nung end of June. Pero nung June mismo, during that month, naglabas ng sulat yung NTC. I think it was Commissioner Cordova who signed it, ordering the telcos to block 27 websites ng Bulatlat Group, among other websites. Were you part of this, and what was the logic behind that? And is this part of the powers of the NTC to immediately order the blocking?
What I know po is that there is a letter from National Security.
Yes, sir. From
Advisor.
Secretary Esperon.
Council, EES, requesting for the blocking. And NTC kasi, if there are requests from competent government agencies like the police and the SWD as far as child pornography is concerned, and all the others, no? So pagka may request and the commission knows that these are competent government agencies, in-order po yung mga telcos to block certain sites or links based on the requests coming from competent government agencies. Yun po yung ginagawa. May mga, halimbawa, may request ang DSWD to yung child pornography. Then we order the telcos to block the links in the sites showing child pornographic materials. So,
Yes, sir.
ganyan po ang ginawa.
Yes, sir. Well, yes, sir. I do understand, for example, in the case of child pornography, kasi yun, medyo obvious yun eh. Pero for example, I'll give you a hypothetical. For example, if Malacanang or if some senior government official ask NTC to block a website of a news organization that they disagree with, what happens then?
Well, depende po sa government agency. If it is, the term kasi is competent government agency, you know. So, saan galing yung request? So, if the request comes from IPO regarding intellectual properties, then we give in to the request, no? Request of blocking this, blocking that, and we order them to do that. Because IPO is the competent agency as far as implementing the IPR laws. So ganyan po ang ginagawa ng Commission.
Yes, sir.
And TRCB, ganun din, and TRCBS.
Yes, sir. Pero yung nga, sir, for example, in terms of political aspects, for example, if Malacanang, this is hypothetical, but if Malacanang disagrees with the stories being generated by one website, can Malacanang then simply ask NTC to block that website?
Mahirap po kasi because these are decisions that has been made by the commissioner. Kasi judging on what competent authorities are concerned. So judgment noon ng commissioner yan ba ay competent government authorities o hindi? Ganun ho yun. So judgment call po yan ng commissioner.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. But one last question, sir. But even then, wouldn't or shouldn't the NTC be asking for the side of the administrators of the website that they're going to block? Wouldn't that be part of due process? Kasi because in the end, if we just go by that, if it's by competent government officials, then it's very unilateral. It's on their say-so, tapos na usapan.
Well, tulad din ho ng if it comes from the IPO, so we believe that IPO has done its job of investigating this, investigating that, and then getting the size of business. So ganun po yan. And then the request comes in, and then we order the blocking. So yun po yung ginagawa Kasi NTC does not conduct investigations.
Yeah.
Hindi po.
Yes. So there's no hearing, kumbaga, the side of
NTC. Hindi competent ang NTC to investigate, say, IPRs, hindi ho, and yung anti-pornographic materials, hindi. So, beyond the competence.
Yeah. Kaya lang, kawawa rin yung mga media outfits pag kami nagalit sa amin.
Yun nga, sir,
all they have to do is to just
that's what I'm driving at. That's also what I'm driving at. Again, this is hypothetical. If, for example, a senior government official or a major government agency disagrees with the stories that are generated by one website, could they simply order the blocking of that website just like that? Walang proseso for appeals, walang getting the side of the site that you're going to block. It just happens to be on the say-so of what you say, a competent government agency.
Yes, yun po yung process na sinusunod. If it comes from a competent government authority or agency, then the request is granted po.
Okay. Ami, go ahead.
That's written in the NTC rules, ba? That's really specified in your mandate. Na gano'n ang situation.
No. The Commission's mandate is regulating the telcos and broadcast. Yun po yung mandate. But as far as broadcast is concerned, we do not have any jurisdiction over contents. Maski na po sa telco, we do not have any jurisdiction over contents. So pagdating po sa contents, etc., then we defer to the judgment of those agencies which have authorities over contents. MTRCB, if there is a request from MTRCB to stop the airing of a program because it violates MTRCB rules, then we are obliged to do that. So ganun po ang
Okay, Mr. Edgardo Cabarios, NTC Consultant, sir, maraming salamat for joining us tonight. At ingat po.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you very much po. Thank you.
And that's it for the chiefs. We hope as a discussion will keep the conversation going. I'm Ed Lingao.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Luchi Cruz-Valdes, News 5.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.